The first time her eyes lingered on me, I knew she wasn't just looking, she was daring me to see her as more than my friend's mom. I hadn't been to my best friend's house in months. College had pulled me in one direction, life in another, and now I was walking through a door that carried too many memories of boyhood. The familiar creak of the floorboard by the hallway felt almost comforting. Yet what unsettled me wasn't nostalgia. It was the way everything in that house felt smaller, as though I had outgrown it. I dropped my bag by the couch and waited. That's when I heard the soft shuffle of heels against the wood. She stepped into the room, her presence filling it with quiet authority. My friend's mom. She hadn't changed much, or maybe she had in ways I wasn't prepared for. Her hair, darker at the roots and lighter at the ends, caught the afternoon sunlight spilling through the blinds. Her movements were graceful, like someone who didn't need to announce herself to be noticed. But it was her eyes that stopped me. They found mine and held, steady, amused, as though she could read the thoughts tumbling through my head before I could even form them. "Look at you," she said, her voice warm yet threaded with something sharper. "You've grown into yourself." I managed a polite smile, but my pulse betrayed me. It beat faster than it should have, and I became acutely aware of the space between us. The faint scent of her perfume drifted closer, something elegant, floral with a touch of spice. It clung to the air long after she passed by, leaving me dizzy in a way that felt dangerous. She moved to tidy a stack of magazines on the coffee table, her hand brushing past mine when she reached for one at the edge. The touch was fleeting, almost nothing, but it sent a jolt through me. I pulled back too quickly, hoping she hadn't noticed. But she had. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, as if my reaction amused her. I told myself it was all in my head, that she was simply being welcoming. After all, she had known me since I was a kid. Yet there was something new in the way she carried herself around me, an awareness that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it was me who had changed, older now, no longer a boy, seeing her not only as my friend's mother but as a woman in her own right. The room suddenly felt warmer, the silence between us too heavy. I shifted in my seat, trying to focus on the sound of footsteps upstairs, my friend rummaging around, unaware of the current running in this living room. She glanced back at me one last time before leaving the room, her expression unreadable except for that subtle curve of her lips. A smirk. Small, controlled, but enough to make me wonder if she knew exactly what she was doing. In that moment, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just a guest in this house anymore. I was standing at the edge of something far more complicated, and far more dangerous, than I had ever expected. That evening, the house had grown quiet. My friend had slipped upstairs, his door closed with the familiar thud of video games taking over his attention. The hum of the refrigerator filled the kitchen, soft and steady, as I stood by the counter pouring myself a glass of water. I didn't hear her approach. Only when her reflection appeared in the darkened window above the sink did I realize she was behind me. She moved with that same effortless composure, barefoot now, her hair loosely gathered as though the day had finally given her permission to rest. "You're taller than I remember," she said softly, almost to herself, as she opened the cupboard and reached for a mug. Her voice carried a calm certainty that both steadied me and sent a ripple through my chest. I turned, trying to keep my tone casual, but there was no mistaking the way my words felt, too deliberate, too careful. "I guess time does that." She smiled faintly, filling the mug with tea. The steam curled upward, carrying a gentle scent of chamomile. "Time changes everything, doesn't it?" she murmured. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment, I couldn't look away. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. As if the weight of those words belonged to her more than anyone else. The silence stretched, not awkward but charged, and she broke it with a small laugh. "You look nervous," she teased, her voice lilting with amusement. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "Do I?" "You do," she replied, stepping closer. She set the mug down on the counter, and before I could react, her hand lifted toward me. Her fingertips brushed lightly against my collar, adjusting it with deliberate care. The touch was simple, nothing inappropriate, yet it set my skin alight. Her fingers lingered a fraction longer than necessary, grazing the side of my neck. Heat rose to my face, and I forced myself not to move, not to step away. Every muscle in my body was aware of her closeness, the warmth of her hand, the faint rhythm of her breathing, the subtle sweetness of her perfume mixing with the earthy chamomile. "There," she said finally, withdrawing her hand with a satisfied smile. "Much better." But the trace of her touch remained, pulsing against my skin long after she had stepped back. I gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself, trying to mask the storm inside me. We talked then, about nothing and everything: her favorite books, the music that carried her through long nights, the small frustrations of her day. Her voice was low and steady, each word weaving an invisible thread that drew me in closer. I found myself listening not just to what she said but to how she said it, the warmth in her tone, the pauses that left room for me to lean in, the laughter that slipped so easily from her lips. And though it should have felt casual, harmless, I couldn't shake the thought that she was choosing this moment. That she had come downstairs not for tea, but for me. By the time my friend's footsteps echoed on the stairs, I almost forgot why I was in the kitchen at all. The afternoon sun had already begun to fade when she asked if I could help her bring in a few bags from the car. It was a simple request, one that shouldn't have meant anything, yet I found myself following her out to the driveway with my chest tight, every step sharper with awareness. The trunk was open, groceries stacked high. I reached for the heavier bags, wanting to seem useful, though part of me simply needed something to occupy my restless hands. She watched with a glint of amusement in her eyes, leaning lightly against the car door, as if she had all the time in the world. "You don't need to carry them all at once," she said, her voice smooth, teasing. "I've got it," I muttered, tightening my grip. By the time we set the bags down on the kitchen counter, a soft laugh escaped her. It wasn't mocking, it was knowing, warm, almost indulgent. She moved closer to take one of the lighter bags from me, her arm brushing against mine. That brief contact, bare skin against skin, sent a subtle shock through me. I tried to steady my breathing, but she must have noticed. She always noticed. As she unpacked, she asked me little questions, about classes, about what I planned to do after college, about how long I was staying. Her tone was light, but the way she looked at me wasn't. It lingered, tracing over me as though she was searching for something deeper than the surface answers I offered. At one point, I caught her gaze directly. Neither of us looked away quickly enough. The air between us tightened, as though silence itself had weight. And then, she leaned just slightly closer, lips curving into a smirk that was half playful, half dangerous. Her voice dropped lower, slower. "One kiss, and you'll be mine before you know it." The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. I felt my stomach tighten, my pulse jump. She didn't laugh, didn't try to soften the moment. Instead, she let it hang there, her eyes steady on mine, daring me to interpret it however I wanted. Was it a joke? A tease? Or a confession spoken in disguise? I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat had closed, caught between the urge to dismiss it and the desire to believe it. Her smirk deepened as though my silence was exactly the response she'd expected. She slipped past me, brushing against my shoulder, leaving a faint trail of warmth behind. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air long after she had moved to the sink to rinse her hands, as though she had placed an invisible mark on me that water couldn't wash away. I stood frozen, every nerve alive, my mind replaying her words in a loop I couldn't escape. And when she glanced back over her shoulder, eyes glinting with quiet amusement, I knew she hadn't said it carelessly. She wanted me to remember it. And I did. The days that followed felt different. Every moment in that house seemed to carry an undercurrent, as though her words had left a charge in the air that neither of us bothered to erase. It showed in the smallest of ways. In the morning, I would come downstairs expecting the quiet clatter of dishes, and instead, I would find a cup of coffee already waiting for me on the table. Not just poured, prepared the way I liked it. Too precise to be a guess. Too intentional to ignore. When I thanked her, she only gave that same knowing smile, as though it pleased her more to watch me wrestle with the meaning than to hear my gratitude. One evening, we ended up on the couch, a movie flickering across the screen. My friend had left midway to answer a call, his voice faint upstairs. That left the two of us in a half-lit room, the glow of the television casting long shadows across the carpet. She sat close. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that I felt the warmth of her presence. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just the way the cushions sloped. But then her arm brushed mine. Once, twice. Too many times to be coincidence. Every accidental touch felt deliberate, each one lingering just long enough to send heat racing through my skin. My breath caught when her hand settled against the cushion between us, fingers stretched so close they nearly grazed mine. It was such a small distance, yet the awareness of it filled my chest, pressing against me harder than words ever could. The movie played on, but I couldn't tell you a single detail about it. All I knew was the sound of her steady breathing, the faint rise and fall of her shoulders, the way she leaned slightly toward me as though gravity itself pulled her closer. At one point, she laughed at something on the screen. The sound was soft, melodic, and it made me look at her instead of the movie. Her eyes caught mine in the flickering light, and for a suspended moment, neither of us looked away. My hand twitched, instinctively moving an inch closer to hers. Not enough to touch, but enough for her to notice. She didn't retreat. Instead, her fingers brushed across mine in the subtlest motion, as if by accident. The contact was feather-light, but it sent a current straight through me. She didn't acknowledge it. Didn't need to. Her posture remained calm, her attention fixed on the screen, but her smile, barely there, half hidden, told me she knew exactly what she was doing. By the time my friend returned, the space between us was gone, rearranged into something neither of us could deny. And yet not a word was spoken. Only the steady rhythm of touches so fleeting they might have been mistakes, if not for the deliberate silence that wrapped around them. It was late when the quiet between us finally gave way to something deeper. The house had settled into stillness, my friend asleep upstairs, the night pressing in against the windows. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling absently through my phone, when I heard the soft sound of footsteps. She appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a thin sweater, a mug of tea in her hand. The low light from the lamp above caught the curve of her face, softening her expression. She didn't say anything at first, just crossed the room and sat across from me. "You're not tired?" she asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "Not really," I admitted. "I guess my head's too busy." She nodded slowly, as though she understood more than I was willing to explain. She took a sip of her tea, then set it down, her fingers circling the rim of the mug as if it grounded her. For a while, we talked about safe things, music, movies, little stories from my classes. But her eyes never left mine, and the longer we sat there, the less those distractions mattered. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders lowering as though she'd decided to surrender something she'd been carrying. "You know," she began softly, "people forget that I'm more than just someone's mom." Her words caught me off guard. The steadiness in her voice wavered, a quiet admission tucked into the shadows of the night. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. She hesitated, eyes lowering to her hands. "It's like once you reach a certain point, people stop looking at you as a woman with her own thoughts, her own needs. They only see the role you fill." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Some days it feels like I disappear." Something in my chest tightened. I had never thought of her that way, never realized how much strength it must take to carry that silence. "You don't disappear," I said quietly. "Not to me." The words slipped out before I could stop them, but I didn't regret them. Not when I saw how she looked at me then, surprised, yes, but softened too, her eyes searching mine for sincerity. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing lightly over the back of my hand. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it carried more weight than any kiss could have. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Her hand lingered, warm against my skin. "Because I'll believe you." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with everything unspoken. Her thumb traced a slow, absent circle against my hand, a motion so tender it left me breathless. And in that fragile moment, sitting across from her in the half-light, I realized it wasn't just attraction pulling me toward her. It was the truth of her, lonely, resilient, and yearning to be seen. And I wanted to see her. The night after our conversation at the kitchen table, I couldn't shake her words. They followed me into my dreams and back into the quiet morning light, lingering like the trace of her touch on my hand. And though either of us spoke of it again, something had shifted. It happened a few evenings later. My friend had stepped out for the night, leaving me alone in the house with her. I told myself it was nothing unusual, that we'd shared space before, but this time, the silence between us pulsed with something unspoken. She suggested we watch a movie in the living room. I agreed, though I couldn't have told you what we picked. The screen flickered, filling the room with a soft glow, but my focus wasn't on the story unfolding there. It was on the nearness of her body, the warmth radiating from her even though we sat with a thin cushion of space between us. Halfway through, she shifted closer, pulling a blanket over her lap. "Cold?" I asked, my voice low, trying to sound casual. "Maybe a little," she murmured, her lips curving into that familiar half-smile. Then, almost without thought, she lifted the edge of the blanket in silent invitation. I hesitated only a moment before sliding under. The warmth was immediate, not from the fabric, but from her. Her arm brushed mine, and the simple touch made my heart race. For a while, we pretended to watch. But then she turned her head, her eyes catching mine in the dim light. The silence deepened, thickened, until it became almost unbearable. Her hand lifted slowly, as though she was testing both her courage and mine. Fingertips grazed my jaw, feather-light, tracing along the line of stubble that had grown in since my last shave. My breath caught, chest tightening under the weight of her touch. "See?" she whispered, her voice so soft it felt like it was meant only for me. "You're not a boy anymore." Her words sank into me, heavy, undeniable. My pulse throbbed in my throat as she leaned closer, the space between us collapsing into something charged, electric. I could feel the warmth of her breath ghosting across my lips, delicate and intoxicating. Time seemed to slow. Every detail sharpened, the flutter of her lashes, the faint scent of chamomile still clinging to her hair, the tremor in my own hands as I fought not to reach for her. She hovered there, close enough that one tilt forward would have ended it. My body screamed to close the distance, but before I could move, she paused. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable, strength, restraint, maybe mercy. And then she pulled back, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "Not yet," she said softly. The words burned hotter than a kiss might have. She shifted away just enough to leave me aching, yet not so far that the heat of her presence faded. And in that suspended space, I understood, this was no accident. She wanted the tension alive, wanted me restless, wanted the fire to build until either of us could ignore it. I lay awake long after the credits rolled, replaying that almost kiss, the ghost of it lingering like a mark no one else could see. Days passed, and the rhythm between us settled into something both delicate and unshakable. The tension hadn't disappeared, it had softened, evolved into a steady warmth that hummed quietly beneath ordinary moments. Every glance, every brush of skin carried meaning now, though it was subtle enough that anyone else might have missed it. One evening, I found her sitting in the living room, a book in her hands, the soft lamplight casting a glow over her face. I hesitated at the doorway, my mind racing with the memory of our almost kiss, the trace of her touch that had lingered like a phantom. She looked up, catching my gaze, and a small, quiet smile curved her lips, a smile that invited, but did not demand. I crossed the room slowly, aware of the charged silence that stretched between us. She didn't move away, didn't shrink from the space I claimed beside her. Instead, she shifted slightly, letting me settle next to her. Our knees brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a familiar warmth through me, and yet it felt safe this time, grounded in mutual understanding rather than suspense. We talked quietly, about nothing important at all. The conversation was easy, filled with pauses that allowed our closeness to speak for itself. At one point, she reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. The touch was gentle, tender, and it grounded me more than anything else had in weeks. My fingers lingered near hers, tracing the outline of her hand without crossing the line, just close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I like this," she murmured softly, her eyes meeting mine with quiet sincerity. "Us like this." Her words struck me with their simplicity. No teasing, no challenge, just honesty. The weight of desire, longing, and unspoken possibilities had been distilled into something real, tangible, and safe. I nodded, my voice barely audible. "Me too." The rest of the evening passed in gentle rhythms. The quiet crackle of the lamp, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the comfort of being near someone who had once seemed untouchable. We leaned back, shoulders occasionally brushing, hands resting close without need to grasp. Every movement, every glance, carried affection, but in a way that was patient, deliberate, and entirely human. It wasn't the fire of a sudden, forbidden encounter. It was something steadier, warmer, a slow burn that didn't need to be rushed. And in that steadiness, there was intimacy deeper than a kiss could convey, trust, understanding, the knowledge that our connection was no longer defined by age, circumstance, or expectation. By the time my friend returned home, the room was filled with the quiet comfort of our closeness. We didn't hide it, but we didn't need to announce it. The smiles we exchanged, the brush of hands as she handed me a cup of tea, spoke volumes without a word. As I left that night, walking back to my own space, I realized something important. This was enough. The almost kisses, the teasing smirks, the quiet tension, all of it had led to a connection that was richer, steadier, and far more meaningful than any fleeting moment could provide. And in that knowledge, I felt a warmth that would stay with me long after the lights went out, an unspoken promise that some bonds, built slowly and carefully, could last a lifetime.